Hey, it's Drybear. The patch preview for the upcoming 0.1.1 patch for Path of Exile 2 Early Access is up. It's fully itemized for all the line items going into the game. So let's review what's going on. The patch is set to go live hopefully in the next couple hours. Now, temper your expectations on this one, because this one was primarily just, they mentioned, was a list of things that they thought they could get done within the week or two of them returning from the holiday. This isn't a major balance rework for the classes. There's a whole lot of new content coming in, but there's a bunch of stuff that have been driving people crazy that are going to be added to this patch with patch 0.1.1. For Endgame Changes, they're adding 4 new tower maps: Alpine Ridge, Bluff, Mesa, and Sinking Spire. I think these are always intended to be in the game from the start, but they added this in just because the Lost Towers are kind of a joke. I'm just at the point where I just put a tier 1 map into the Lost Tower, blow through it, open the tablet, and then move on, just because they're so short. The loot isn't usually that great, and it's just very repetitive in a lot of ways. So having at least new visuals for the Lost Towers, I think, will go a long way. They're also adding in additional respawns within the context of a single Arbiter of Ash attempt. If you don't know what that is, you have to clear the 3 citadels in the game, which is the 3 final act bosses for endgame version, get their key pieces from them, and then go to the burning monolith, put them in, and be able to use them to unlock the Arbiter of Ash boss fight. This doesn't mean that you can leave and try again. You only get 1 attempt at the Arbiter of Ash. However, they will give you, at the lowest difficulty, 6 respawns, which means you can die and respawn 6 times on the same fight, but you can't like exit, close your game, come back tomorrow and try again, or change your build. You have to use the build you have, you have to keep what you've got, but in the context of that fight, you will be able to respawn. They also mentioned that in multiplayer, you'll be able to, like, the person that started the encounter with Arbiter of Ash can trigger the respawn, and everyone will be respawned. So if you're doing the co-op in PoE 2, you can at least do that there. And I think that just makes it a little bit more fair for people learning the fight for the first time. And they did mention that on the higher difficulties, as you push further and further into the pinnacle area, it will have less and less respawns. They also did some changes to the general gameplay of the Arbiter of Ash, nothing major. Things like being invulnerable for longer in the emergence. There were some Archmage builds that were killing him before he finished his intro animation, and so they made it so he's invulnerable for longer, so at least he can do his cool man bad guy intro and then you fight him. And also made him less likely to target minions to prevent some abuse cases, but also to allow minion builds to have a little bit of a fairer interaction. They also added checkpoints to map areas. I'm curious, once this is live, how many checkpoints they've added. There are some maps that are just like very separated in their layout. I forget which ones, but they're like, I would recognize it by the layout, but not the name. There's just some maps that like you have to go into different corners to reveal things. There's even the one where you have to like, has the glorious pelican or pecan in the middle that you have to like on the rock, sitting on the rock sunbathing, but you have to do all of the switches to activate and go in, and sometimes you forget one and it's blocked off, so you have to go around the entirety of the map to go back and hit a switch. There's some maps where you have to like go to different corners, or it's completely separated out, things like Savannah and stuff like that. So it's nice to be able to have some teleports there, not necessarily for respawns, because there's no respawns for maps, but just for fast travel, so you can get through the bigger maps and move around them. So they said that in general, checkpoints have been added to maps for teleporting, so we'll see where those actually go. Map areas now contain a minimum of 3 rare monsters. Citadels now appear closer to the Ziggurat Refuge. So the patch isn't live yet, but the Ziggurats themselves, like it's based on the Ziggurat, the Citadels would spawn like sometimes really far away and sometimes not. So you can see like, at least on this atlas I have here, I always get so freaking lost on these. So this is where you would spawn. You can see that the first citadels that I was able to find here were pretty far away, right? So like this is the iron one, pretty far away from the start, and then there's like a copper one here, and there's like a stone one over here somewhere, but they're pretty far away. So they just made it so that in this patch, the citadels, the first rounds of them, will spawn closer to the beginning, so you can actually see them from further away and run into them. And they're also gonna, and we'll see this in a minute, they're also gonna be adding in a option where a citadel in the fog of war will have this giant beam coming up out of it. So you'll actually be able to see where the citadels are, so you can head towards them, because there were certain situations where people would start out and actually get lucky and say, if like starting is here, there might be a citadel here, and a lot of people told everyone to just go in one direction until you find them, but sometimes there'd be a citadel here on your left and a citadel here on your right, and you would take a path straight through the middle, just enough where it would be covered by the fog of war, and you would skip over citadels for long periods of time as you were going straight without realizing they were there, which I think just adds to the feeling that citadels don't exist. exist. So they're going to make it so not only do they spawn closer to the beginning, but they also will allow you to see them in the Fog of War, which I think are two great changes. Maps will also display their biome, the one that they are inside of in the Atlas UI, so you can see which are contained in which biome. This is mostly useful because they said there will be one citadel per biome for the most part. So if you're moving into a biome without fully exploring the one you're in, you may want to continue exploring it because there could be a citadel in there. Although it's kind of a moot point because you'll be able to really just see where they are regardless. They also added the new Overseer's Precursor tablet, which will allow you to add bosses to maps in an area. It's still going to be random, just like everything that comes from the Lost Towers, but it's great because bosses in general are a big part of you being able to sustain your waystones. If you don't do a boss, it's a lot less likely that you'll get some waystones back from that. So having more bosses and also the ability to add bosses is huge for the game. Map areas have been adjusted to have more distinct specialties for the content they contain. The smaller they are or the more difficult they are, they may have more likelihood of having those things as part of it. And they also said that a number of maps will have more chests on them, more monsters, more rares, more like the minimum number of rare monsters in the map itself, essences, strong boxes, shrines, all of that. So some of the maps may just feel a little bit more interesting and unique based on what you're actually doing and what the map is. This will probably be just a little bit more felt than understood from a text-written standpoint, but it's nice to have that as part of it. They also adjusted the chance for maps to contain bosses. Encountering bosses should happen now. 1 in every 4 maps is what they're looking for. They're so valuable that you really need to have them happen. And I'm wondering if the reason that the map boss count was low is because not all the bosses are currently in the game, because obviously they're using the campaign bosses for the maps we're facing. So maybe with the game complete, it was meant to have more bosses anyways, and now they just adjusted the chance for those bosses to show up so that it actually matches where the amount of content we have right now in the game. They also had the chance for map bosses to drop a waystone of current or higher tier has been reduced to account for the increase in map bosses overall, and they've adjusted the waystone Atlas passives that will just to counteract the fact that more map bosses will be around, and you can add more map bosses as well, because previously it would be a little more fixed. So the fact that the amount of map bosses you're fighting is going to go up, so they're adjusting the other percentages to make sure that it counteracts for that. They also reduced the number of monsters in small chests from breaches by 15%. Some breaches were just very difficult to survive because you would get swarmed so hard. The simulacrum sprinters found in maps is increased by 20%, and they added some really cool things like the simulacrums and fragments and stuff like that have a more appropriate gold value to vendors, and you can zoom out further with the Atlas. So the amount you can zoom out right now still isn't enough. Even when I was just showing you the Atlas in game right now, you still need to be zoomed out more. And there's also a couple Atlas bugs that they haven't addressed in this patch that hopefully they fix soon, where the map disappears or items vanish, things like that. For skill changes, they made it so there is a cap in distance for Supercharged Slam. I guess it just was too much for them, and it was also causing some server issues. There's another one here as well, the Temporalis Unique Body Armor, which sets a cap for cooldowns. It can no longer reduce the cooldowns of a skill to below 100 MS. So there were issues with the Temporalis build. Actually, there's a big Temporalis style Blood Mage build that people are using right now, which is super cool. But there's also some cast on minion death builds that people are running that get to the point where they're they actually crash their game or crash the server because it's causing so many interactions at once that it's just breaking everything. And so they put a limit of 100 MS for the cooldowns, so we can't trigger cooldowns faster than that with Temporalis, and they're also capping the distance on Supercharged Slam. This isn't really for balance, it's more just so that the game doesn't break and you don't lag other players that might be in the game with you, that sort of thing. Scavenge plating now also gives you multiple stacks based on the enemy you're facing, up to 10 stacks on unique enemies, and the lightning bolt that you get from the Choir of the Storm has now been renamed to Greater Lightning Bolt to not be confused with the staff ability that you get, and also triggered Greater Lightning Bolts are now unable to trigger a subsequent Greater Lightning Bolt if the first was a critical hit. They also clarified Vine Arrow's description. They made it so skill socketed and metagem sockets can no longer gain energy, and they removed the aura tag from the pain offering, just because technically it's not giving aura. It's a spawns a minion that is a offering that is doing the aura, so you can't do like any aura double stacking on that. They're very specific about these things in general, so that everything is very insulated. It doesn't have like double dipping or triple dipping in stats, because they like things to go crazy overall. They did a bunch of monster changes, which I would argue is probably the best change overall in this patch, aside from console loot filters. But they did a bunch of changes across a lot of monsters. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You'll probably just feel it when you play in general. But things like monsters like having better telegraphs for explosions, volatile plant explosions, grenades on the Dread Engineers now deal less damage in cruel end maps, a small delay before monsters release for the monolith can use their skills, because sometimes with essences they would just pop everything all at once and insta-gib you in one shot. They also adjusted the toughness per essence, because some of the the essence monsters were too weak, but they were doing all their skills at once. So now they're going to be a little bit more survivable, so they're a little bit more challenging in the way that you fight them. A range reduction on the Lost Men Zealots meteor, so they don't meteor you from off screen. Filthy Crones no longer projectile vomit at point blank range, so it instantly hits you when you're right on top of it. Same thing for the Rotting Hulks as well, and the Bog Hulks that do that vomit from their stomach. It's not going to happen at point blank range. They'll just do melee attacks if you're close to them. Big one for a lot of people is adjusted the damage area of Zalmarath the Colossus, the big dude, to more closely match the visual effects. This has been a big problem for like Blackjaw and plenty other bosses, so this getting adjusted is great. And this is the first step in many that I hope that is going to make things way better. And any boss that is very large has multiple hitboxes, and I actually hate it. It's so terrible. The Colossus is one of the worst ones, but there's more, like the big skeleton inside of the hole, like a bunch of bosses, even like some of the bosses in the Sekhmis trial, they have multiple hitboxes, and it means that when their arms have hitboxes, you shoot at their arms with projectiles, but then you're just shooting off screen and missing. It's terrible. It's horrible. It would be less painful if the auto aim wasn't so bad, but the fact that you're constantly shooting at their arms while they're moving and animating is just horrible. So they changed it so the arms are no longer a target for the auto aim. For the Colossus, he just has a big hitbox at the edge of the ring, which I think is the right way to go, so all of that is really good. They also adjusted the Crow of Judgment, aka Balak the Sky Seers. His tornado will now more closely match the visual effects of the tornado. It will now push you away from it slightly, so you're not going to be stuck in it permanently, and it'll deal less damage at start and then ramp up. So there's not going to be as many people that just get instantly insta-gibbed by the tornado from the Crow of Judgment. Makes him a little bit more viable. He's still the scariest boss even with this change. Some of his melee attacks are very strong, especially depending on what modifiers you're doing and how high the Trial of Chaos is, but this is going to be a step in the right direction. Adjusted the damaging area of Executioner's attacks to more closely match the visual effects. The telegraphing for his Guillotine Slam has been improved. The Guillotine Slam didn't bother me as much, but some of his melee attacks and explosions for the Executioner, you'll be completely out of the animation and still take damage from it, which is really, really rough on the higher map difficulty. They also made it so that Jaman Ra, his skirt, no longer spontaneously explodes on deaths. And another one, probably one of the most dangerous mobs in the game, is the Cultist Archers. These guys have killed me more than most mobs in the game. They have a Toxic Rain skill that they'll deal, and it actually does ridiculous damage, and it also has a stun effect, so it'll mini stun you and cause you to stutter step. And if there's multiple Cultist Archers, they'll shoot multiple volleys, and then you'll just get stun locked into death from this, especially if you're running like any of the endgame activities, like Expedition, if they show up in Breach, things like that. Any of these that show up, they become incredibly dangerous. So making the visibility better and making it do less damage is going to be very helpful for that. They made the Silver Fist roll forward is doing less damage. This one was super fast. If you were melee against this, he would automatically go into the roll and instantly hit you. And it's also one of those moves that shoves you if you collide with the collision box, which makes it even worse, because then he'll just shove you, hit you, shove you, hit you, shove you, hit you. It's like this bowling ball effect where he just hits you like 8 times. So having this do significantly less damage, I think is going to be really good for melee players that can't be far away to avoid it. Walking Goliaths no longer deal damage twice when they fall over. The slam now deals more damage in the center and less around the edges. These mobs, I think, kind of like the Colossus, need a huge revamp to their overall collision box. When they fall down, the area you take damage from and the shoving that happens from the collision is nowhere near the animation of the skeleton falling down. And honestly, like, I give them like a tri-state area distance if I can, even if I'm playing melee, because I do not trust the hitboxes of these Goliaths at all whatsoever, which is horrible. I actually even had like a floor 4 Sekhmis where there's narrow hallways that was infinitely spawning massive walking Goliaths. That was one of the worst experiences ever. You just couldn't get around them. They also made it for, at least for the campaign, Utsal has had reduced density and the monsters there are a weaker variety. This one didn't bother me much, but going into the end of Act 3, there was a massive increase in difficulty and a lot of new players were getting stuck on that and ended up dying or, you know, feeling like they really had to upgrade their build to get through it. But except that for that, the density of monsters in the dread areas has been adjusted to result in less swarming encounters. And again, this is just, again, the Dreadnought just has narrow pathways. I think they just have to be mindful of the kind of mobs they have and the overall layout of the map. If you can have a whole bunch of like player-wide size walkways, having a ton of hasted mobs just makes that feel really yucky in a lot of cases. So I think that's going to be a big thing for them as well. Chaos Pustules and Ritual Counters have had their visuals improved. This one's super good, especially since, you know, sometimes the Ritual random's an area that's very narrow, and so not being able to see these properly, I think, is going to be a big gain for that as well. The Impending Doom modifier for Trial of Chaos now has more time before it explodes and has had its visuals improved. I think a big thing about the Impending Doom modifier is there was a safe zone in the middle that many people didn't even notice just because of the visuals of it. So knowing that you can go closer to the middle of it, I think is going to be a big thing for a lot of people for the Impending Doom as well. They also telegraphed the anchor drop from the Essence of Torment. The first time I met an Essence of Torment mob, I died instantly to it because I couldn't even see that the anchor was dropping at all. So improving this is going to be a big one. I think it's going to make a big difference for the Essence of Torment encounter. And same thing goes for the Essence of Electricity. That's that big area in front with the safe zone in the middle. It pops up real fast and explodes real fast. So they slowed it down and improved the visuals of it as well. They also made it so Volta plants are now much more noticeable before and as they're about to explode. They gave a visual aura to the prevents recovery above 50% modifier, which previously was just completely invisible, which is nice. And if you ever wondered why extra energy shield monsters always had a ridiculous amount of HP, it's because they did. If they had extra energy shield as a modifier, the amount of HP that they had from the energy shield was not really comparable to their current HP, so it made things very, very weird. Moving on to general changes, enabled migrating from solo self-found to the parent league. This one was always meant to be in the game, it just wasn't in the game, and so they turned it off. I guess there was some issue with it initially, but this coming back on is nice. This means that you can, for one time only, it's permanent, you can't undo it, but if you're a solo self-found standard or solo self-found hardcore, you will be able to turn that off and migrate to the normal league version of what you're doing, and then be able to activate trade if you want, and then you could do it once and then it's over, and that way you can do it from character selection and you're good to go. If you really don't want to do solo self-found anymore, but you want to keep the character, you certainly can. They buffed up strong boxes to fade away the fog effect so you can actually see what's on the ground. Many of the strong boxes just covered every visual effect so you couldn't see anything, and they also spawn waves of enemies over a much shorter period of time. Strong boxes are going to be less of like a sleeper moment and hopefully are a little more engaging and take way less time. You get to the point where you just stop doing them because they're so time consuming and usually aren't that rewarding. They also increase the chance to encounter research strongboxes. Charms now play an effect on your character when they are automatically used, and there's hopefully it has the UI as well in game, so you can actually see that being used, so you actually know when the charms are going off. Socketables such as runes can now be overwritten by placing another socketable item into the socket. They say such as runes, and they showed runes in the video. Hopefully this also means soul cores, because the thing you're overwriting gets destroyed anyway in the process, so it'd be nice if you could use soul cores as well here, because I do have some items that are on soul cores now that I would like to replace and use something else with, at least from that, but at least we can replace runes and hopefully soul cores as well. Another big one here is flasks with quality are now able to be salvaged. Presumably this will give you the glass blowers bubble so you can add quality to flasks. Hopefully, I think they said that they didn't want to do this because it didn't make sense to salvage glass because it would just break, which is kind of nonsense. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but in general, having this as an option is going to be nice. And they did make good on the change. Armor has been made more effective by approximately 15%. So, I'm curious what they mean by made more effective based on the calculation. The current way that armor works is that armor is basically like a way to stamp out damage that is lower than the amount of armor you have. So the size of the hit that comes in gets compared to the amount of armor that you have, and based on that, it will have a large damage reduction on it or a smaller damage reduction on it, depending on the difference between the two numbers. Whereas like if you have like equal armor to the damage, it's going to be like next to no damage reduction, but if you have way more armor than the hit, it can be like 60, 70, 80% damage reduction. So I'm curious if they just moved that curve up so it's higher damage reduction with a smaller difference in the armor and damage taken on a single hit. We'll have to see. We'll have to test it again once they have this live, but either way, it is a nice improvement for armor. They increased the chance for omens to appear as ritual rewards, which is huge. They reduced the chance for items to roll some of the less desirable item modifiers like light radius, looking at you. Rarity of items in expedition vendor shops now increases with shop level, so shops generally have more rare items at higher levels. This doesn't affect existing shops, and you will need to use a reroll currency to generate shops with improved rarity, but at least it makes the expedition shops a little less smooge based on what they offer for you. They reduce the visual clutter in many map areas to improve the visibility of skills and effects, and improve the loading time of the world map. This is something that a lot of people experience in their first couple weeks, and probably honestly still now, where if you accidentally hit U on PC instead of I to open your inventory and you bring up the world map and you see the grinding gears logo spinning and the world map takes forever. So hopefully they significantly improve this to make it load a lot faster than before. Alva now has the ability to gamble for items when placed in your hideout. You could do random like gambling in like towns and things like that, but no NPC you could put in your hideout had the option to gamble for items, and now you can by going over to Alva and checking it out. Minions that died from being out of range now instantly revive near you instead of waiting for the revive timer, which is huge. This doesn't solve the problem of minions blocking doorways or getting stuck places, but at least when minions got stuck and you had to walk away to get them to respawn, before they would die and you have to wait for the respawn timer, which currently I still have very large issues with the way the respawn timer resets itself every time a new minion dies. I think regardless, it's not a good system and they need to fix it somehow. With any other implementation that's not so horrible, but at least with this, if they out of range and they get deleted or garbage collected because they're too far away, they'll instantly revive next to you rather than you having to incur the revive minion time, which is going to be a big one. Charms now display the number of charges and when they're active. So you can see their charges on top of the charm itself on the UI, and it'll have a like duration visual UI element over the charm in the bottom left corner of the screen, so you can see when they're active. Gives it a lot more visibility on the charms themselves. I think charms still have a long way to go based on where they are now, but it is a large improvement to actually have a visual representation and a UI element for the charms to know when they're working. They improve some performance for some encounters like the Molten Vault or the Chimera boss fight. I still think they need to reduce the amount of untargetable time periods that the Chimera has. He's one of the most annoying bosses to fight because he's just flying up in the air or leaving the platform or going somewhere else like 90% of the time, especially if you're doing a lot of damage. This homie is just never on the ground or targetable. So hopefully they adjust that in future, but I think they're talking about just general like FPS performance for both of these. And they did a whole bunch of performance patches like on the effects of that plays when killing rare monsters, very bright areas, and some of the end game activity areas in the ziggurat encampment, some performance there. They just did a whole bunch of passes on things that were causing lag, FPS drops for a lot of people. Burning ground can no longer spawn underneath interactables like levers. So you can't just, you have to, like a lot of times, especially when you're fighting like these monsters, the one you see on screen that create the blood puddles, they'll spawn under a lever or a device, and you have to just wait until it disappears so you can go use it. So hopefully they extend this to more than just burning ground, but at least that one is going to be there as well. They also did a whole bunch of unique item changes. Some of these are minor, some of these are major. I'm not going to go through every single one of them because this video has already gotten pretty long as well. I'll leave a link to the patch notes down below if you are interested in checking some of these out. Some of these got some pretty big changes, but I would say a lot of the uniques in the game, especially if they were underperforming, ended up getting touched up in some way. Sometimes adding attributes so that there's new ways to do attribute stacking with some of these, or they have additional stats to help scale with their base. A whole bunch of flat stats were added to items that didn't have these flat stats before. So there's a bunch of unique items that got changed. Check out the full list if you're interested in which ones did get changed. It doesn't look like there's any major nerfs that I found here just by glancing through it, but of course we'll figure out more of those once the patch is live and we can see the items in game. There's also a whole bunch of bug fixes as well, which just adds more to the improvement of performance, things like that. Fixing a lot of problems with the game, which was basically what this whole patch was about. There's also controller improvements for navigating around, clicking on menus, interacting with different things, especially in the trials, prioritizing some skills on enemies if you have interact bound to the same button as a skill, cosmetics, all of that. So just some major UI improvements for plenty of things in the controller portion. And on top of that, the biggest thing in the patch for a lot of people is item filters can now be used on consoles by subscribing to a filter on the Path of Exile website. So go to pathofexile.com. If you're on console, on your official account, you will be able to subscribe to an item filter, and then when you load into your game in console, you will be able to use this filter in game and have that as an option as well. They also added a whole bunch of microtransaction skins from Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2 and fixed a bunch of localization errors. So that is the patch. A whole bunch of stuff going in here. Most of it just feel good stuff, fixing monsters, improving unique items, improving interactions, improving visibility, performance, the atlas, all of that stuff, some skill changes. No major like reworks or major balance changes, but things that just make the game feel better overall. And they will be doing a patch going over balance and then potentially a reset to the economy for the, what people are looking for, based on what's available now. And hopefully as that goes forward, we'll start seeing more. And they said that hopefully in the next couple weeks, they'll let us know about what their plans are for new classes and that sort of thing. But this was they just got back from holiday and they want to quickly get some changes out that make the game feel better and less annoying for a lot of people. And I think they definitely succeeded at that. But let me know what you think about this down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people. And don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.